Hello everyone. So welcome to the next class. Let us recap quickly where did we stop last time. We were talking about the transport sector and how a transition plan can be made for transport sector, and then we were looking at the subcategory of all the transport sectors that we were looking at aviation, which was a troublesome sector for us. We were looking at road transport overall, which was the most emission intensive sector because of just the sheer volume of it. We were looking at shipping, we were looking at railways, which is coming as a savior for this whole sector as of now. So that's what we were looking into, and then we looked into the global picture in the last class. For the last two classes that we were looking into the global picture. So now today let us dive deeper into the Indian transport sector. How is Indian transport sector different from the global transport sector? Will India be okay to replicate the same model as the world is planning to do? Something else should be done for India. What should be done for India? What could be a potential pathway for India to decarbonize its transport sector? So let us start looking into Indian transport sector. So when we start looking at Indian transport sector, one of the major things that we see, and what we also mentioned in the last class, was that within the road transport sector itself, the breakup of the vehicles in India is different from the world because of the given economic status of the people or the buying capacity of the people overall. So while globally lighter vehicles, or what we call as cars, are the major category of vehicles, and they are bound to be the biggest consumption vehicles in terms of number of vehicles. They are bound to be one of the highest ones as we kind of move along. In India, two-wheelers and three-wheelers dominate this whole equation a lot by a very meaningful distance. Two-wheelers and three-wheelers dominate this sector a lot. So even if you start looking at from a emissions perspective also, things start looking differently because of the and this is also what we discussed in the last class also, that while two-wheeler and three-wheeler are the highest volume, they are not the highest emitters as of now, because each of them consumes less. See, emission from this sector, understand from where the emission is coming. Emission is coming because the number of kilometers which is driven by a road and how much fuel is consumed per kilometer, and then what is the emission per liter of fuel. So since the fuel consumption of these two-wheelers and three-wheelers is much lesser compared to the other vehicles, specifically if you talk in terms of buses, we talk in terms of trucks, or for that matter cars also, and because of this fuel efficiency of this specific type of the vehicle, the emission from this vehicles is not large. But in terms of the sheer volume, if you look at it, just in terms of sheer volume, India is very high on two-wheelers and three-wheelers, of course followed by then the cars, and then the buses, and then the trucks and heavy duty vehicles, which are used primarily for carrying out the goods. In terms of powertrain, mostly India depend upon gasoline, or what we call as petrol here. So in some of the western countries we call it gasoline, but we call it petrol here. And then we have a big category which is on the diesel side. Diesel primarily is used by heavy duty vehicles like trucks, and trucks primarily uses it, sometimes buses use it, but overall the vehicle which is primarily used at home, which is two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and especially two-wheelers and four-wheelers, they primarily use petrol. So that's why consumption for petrol is very high, and that is also a very interesting dynamics for India, because India doesn't produce petrol. India doesn't have its own petrol, but its petrol consumption is pretty substantial, just given the number of vehicles that we apply on the road. So I'll also talk about that what kind of a effect does it have on our energy security side also, because that would mean that India need to have that reliable source of petrol and diesel, more petrol, because the consumption is just so high, right. So anyway, looking at the overall picture, what happens is that our volume of two-wheelers is highest, followed by four-wheelers, and then buses and trucks, of course. But if you look in terms of emission wise, freight trucks specifically, since they are power guzzlers in a way, again looking at the same equations what we looked at for the two-wheelers, if we start looking at the same kind of an equation just by the number and then how many kilometers they drive per number, and then what is the fuel efficiency, per kilometer, and then what is the emission per liter of fuel. If you start looking at the similar kind of equation for trucks also, this is where trucks start creating problem, and this is also where the trucks starts creating problem, because usually they are very long haul distance vehicles, because while the number is less, the number of kilometers driven by them on an average basis compared to a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler, which are privately owned vehicles, is much higher. So these two factors, specifically kilometers per truck and the fuel consumption per kilometer, is very high for this, and that leads to very high emission because this is constant. And so even if this number is low, the overall picture which comes out to be is that emission from this specific sector is very high, just because they fly for a very long distance and they also consume a lot of fuel. So with that situation, if you start looking into it, the number which is very less in terms of the emission, that number is one of the highest emission factor with respect to the overall road transport sector where it goes. And in terms of the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, while they consume about 80% of the vehicle stock, they only account for 20% of the energy demand and emission. So that is a dynamics that you need to keep in mind when we are talking about a transition plan. So transition plan wise, if you are just looking from an emission perspective, the highest troublesome factor for us will be freight trucks, then the cars, then two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and then buses. In that chronology, we will kind of fall down. That this is the chronology in which we will need to do the mitigation for road transport sector. Right. What is projected for India? And of course, since India is a very growing nation, and what we see is that India will have its more and more dispensable income in their pocket. So this equation that our very high dependence on two-wheelers, if you look at it, our two-wheelers dependency is very high as of today, and this dependency of two-wheelers is expected to grow, and it will have a higher volume also for some time. But then an interesting thing start coming up, that this thing somewhere will start saturating if you just start looking in terms of the amount of kilometers that they will travel or amount of volume which will come for them. They will start saturating somewhere. So if you look at it like mode of transport share, if you look at it, while this is one of the highest as of now in terms of the kilometers and number into number of vehicles, and then how many kilometers those vehicles are going. This is what it is, this graph is showing. So if you look at that, while this is one of the highest categories of now, this category will start to saturate somewhere, and they'll actually start going down by 2050, which is interesting in terms of percentage share. So it is not that the number will go down on their own. What is expected to happen is that the number of cars per person, number of cars at home will start to rise very sharply. So when we are looking at India transition story, while in short run we might be better off to look at trucks specifically, we would want to have in control over cars and two-wheelers in that chronology what I discussed. But in longer run, if you look at it, we need to have very comprehensive plan for specifically for the car sector, because that is expected to be the biggest emission like when we go forward. So this rising per capita income is associated with increased car ownership, and this is what is going to lead a kind of a very exponential growth or very substantial growth in this overall domain. And the number of kilometers also what is expected per unit of vehicle would be higher than the two-wheeler and three-wheeler, because two-wheelers and three-wheelers are primarily used as local mode of transport. But cars are used both as a local mean of transport as well as intercity transport also. So with that thing coming up, the number of kilometers which cars will kind of starts covering will be substantially high compared to any other specific subcategory on the roadside itself. So this would mean that the transition story for India has to have car as a central point of the theme, along with obviously two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and then freight and everything else kind of following up, or maybe the buses which will kind of follow. But overall this story would mean that we need to have a plan which needs to have a car at the central focus for this thing. Another thing which some of you might have noticed now, since I am talking about overall kind of a surface transport here, not only or the road transport, railways also is showing a kind of a substantial share with respect to number of kilometers. So mind you, this is not emission, This is number of kilometers that it will expected to be driven by these specific vehicle. Now, this is also interesting to see that currently most of the India travels on trains, and the second amount of India travels mostly on two-wheelers. Like that is what the current India's status is. But as people have more money in their pocket, as people have more dispensable income with them, this is expected to change as we kind of move along. What is expected to happen is that people will have more personal vehicle ownership, which will start growing in with more dispensable money coming in people's pocket. So what is going to happen is that first we will see a wave of two-wheelers and three-wheelers kind of coming up from people who are moving from a very low income category to kind of middle income category, and then they start moving to upper middle kind of a category. The transition will happen towards car, and then the in terms of percentages, the railway transport is not expected to be the main mode of transport going forward. It will be primarily cars, which is going to be the prime mode of transport as we kind of move along. So if you can compare our current travel habits to kind of US travel habits as of now. Currently, we travel more on within local, we travel on two-wheelers, three-wheelers. For intercity, we travel primarily on public vehicles. I'm talking about the bulk of us, right? And that is expected to change as people have more money in the pocket, like in an American system or like in some of the Western country system. People will depend more and more on their private vehicles rather than depending upon the public vehicles, and that is what is coming out very clearly in this whole thing. Another thing which you can see is that even the air travel is expected to grow, as number of kilometers from the air travel side also is expected to grow a lot as people have more and more dispensable income kind of coming up. So, and since car will have more emission compared to a two-wheeler or three-wheeler will have, and this modal shift from two-wheelers, three-wheelers to car would mean per vehicle emission will multiply substantially. This increased air travel will have a multiplier effect in terms of net emission. So, overall, if India does not come up with the right strategy for this transport sector, India could behave very differently from the world, because see, world consumption is not expanding as fast as India's consumption is expanding. India can be more than double with respect to its overall consumption in terms of number of kilometers travel, which is much faster compared to the rest of the world. So, this is India will have to have, like in any other sector, we talked about steel, we talked about aluminum, we talked about cement, all the sectors that we talked about, that since India is growing, so India's consumption is expected to grow very fast with growth of India. So with that growth coming in, India would need to have a different kind of a strategy. Now, we talked about oil as a primary. So what you can see is that backbone of all this is two things. One is electricity for railways specifically, but that takes care of only a partial kind of a transport for us. The rest of the transport, and what you can see here also is that what we discussed here, our primary mode of fuel that we kind of consume here is petrol. Petrol is a very high dependence thing for us, and overall oil is very high consumption commodity for us. And with India not having its own oil consumption, India kind of imports it almost 85% to 90% of its oil every year. And with the kind of consumption that we have, we are very susceptible to global prices volatility. We are very susceptible to geopolitics, right? So whatever is happening in the world over the last 8 to 10 years, India had to tread its path very carefully, because any wrong move from India in terms of its oil strategy could mean that India could be looking at billions of dollars or millions of dollars kind of getting a higher bill on their fuel bill itself. So this is a big concern for us. While diesel remains as the prime thing for freight transport, it is petrol which is primarily the concern with respect to the other road transport goes. So this transport decarbonization will reduce both emission as well as import vulnerability. So what needs to be done is that a strategy for India is not only about decarbonization. A strategy for India will also need to have a path to reduce its dependence on the import of the oil also. So climate policy in this sector should also function as an energy security policy also. So we cannot do away with energy security as a back of the thing in all the policies that we kind of come up with. So this is specifically data, if you look at it, we are seeing this percentage of oil actually going up and not going down, as because we have a limited capacity, which is our domestic capacity. For everything else we depend upon oil being imported, and since our consumption is going up, So, for this growth in consumption, what we need to do is that we need to have this policy where we need to kind of take care of this growth as a substantial, as a very effective measure. What government of India started doing looking at this situation was that in 2018, they came up with this. So, okay, first they came up in 2009 with the policy called ethanol blending program, where they had made a program that India would be blending about 5% of its petrol with the similar kind of a density material called ethanol, which is produced as a byproduct of from the sugarcane industry. Like sugar is made from sugar, you can then remains of the sugar industry, which is molasses. From that molasses, you can produce ethanol, and the ethanol potentially can be blended in petrol. And that's why Government of India started this activity back in 2009 to start working on this line, but that didn't work out. So then in 2018, they started working on this very aggressively again. And overall, what was seen was that in 2018, when they started to put focus on this, suddenly industry started to respond. Because what was done at that time was the Indian industry was given some capital subsidy. Indian industry was given cheaper loan to put this capex for making this ethanol facility. Also, what was done at that time was that government also came up with the policy of getting them a long-term purchase order from the oil marketing companies to these ethanol making companies, where they will have a long-term contract with these oil marketing companies, where whatever they are producing as per the quota given to them was assured by buying was happening from the oil marketing companies. So, with this focus, what India did is that India achieved about 10% of ethanol blending by 2022, and it achieved its target of 20% blending in petrol by 2025. So, whatever growth that you are seeing in fuel, this curve would have been much sharper if this ethanol blending would have not come across, and India is now actually mixing 20% of its petrol by ethanol for most of its uses, right. So, what this ethanol blending does is that it not only improves our energy security, but emission per kilometer for this ethanol is also lower compared to petrol. So, it's a kind of a double advantage. So, what is happening is that our dependence on petrol import is going down with this, and what is happening is also our emissions also are going down because of this policy. There is a downside to this policy also, that per kilometer, how much of vehicle can be run per kilometer using 1 liter of petrol is not equal to how much the vehicle can be run using 1 liter of ethanol, because the energy density of ethanol is lower. So, since it has a lower calorific value, because of this, per liter petrol will be giving more mileage compared to ethanol. But overall, the situation in India is right now that we, whatever petrol that we get is coming as a blended petrol only, and it is advantage from India on a broader perspective, that our oil petrol imports are going down and our emissions are going down. However, it is not a very one-sided story, and this is what I would want all of you to keep in mind, that whenever we are coming with any policy, that policy could have a other side of the story too, and we need to keep that in mind while we are looking into expansion of that policy. So, what happened is that as soon as this ethanol program started to go up, we wanted more sugarcane to come through, and as sugarcane was the primary source of this molasses which was used to make this ethanol. So, we started growing more and more sugarcane, but what we saw that beyond a point we started hitting a plateau with respect to sugarcane growth. So, we started coming up with other kind of food grains as a potential fuel to as a potential grain to make this material which can potentially be converted into ethanol. With that, what we actually came up with, that we had a sugarcane or molasses based facilities coming up, but we also had grain based facilities which started to come up kind of a similar time. So, with both of them kind of coming through, what we had was that we had an overall capacity which was looking very interesting. But what it meant, in other words, was that now we are actually growing fuel on our field. If you look at it from a very, very broad perspective, what are we doing? Instead, since we do not have oil wells, since we do not have a means to get oil or fuel from our ground, what we started doing is that we started growing a source for that oil from our field. Now, as soon as you do that, what you can now do is that you can have a competition with food production. So, it kind of comes as now a debate of food security versus energy security. this becomes a very different kind of a debate now, that is this the right way to go about it? Can we continue to grow around it? Like, of course, there is a right now with the current IC engine which is available in India, or with most of the cars which are running, we cannot go much beyond 20% of blending. That's kind of a upper limit which we can blend right now, because otherwise car will start knocking, there will be engine related issues and all that thing. So, some other countries like Brazil have gone for much higher blending, because their IC engine make, or the kind of details of IC engines are slightly different, the cylinder structure and everything are slightly different, which leads to a potential or possibility of blending more. But for India, we can 20% the limit, but even for that 20% limit, we are talking about a very high volume of ethanol being made. And for that very high volume of ethanol being made, we are potentially converting the grains from our fields to feeding into this oil industry. So, now what is happening is a farmer is getting higher value per hectare for these kind of crops, because these ethanol making companies, or this sugar making companies, or this food grain based ethanol making companies are able to give them money on time, are able to give them more money per hectare of their crop growth, because they are assured of buying from the oil marketing companies. So, oil marketing companies places order on these manufacturers, and these manufacturers in turn buy their raw material from these farmers, and since they are assured of that business, they are able to put these farmers in a very good position, because they are able to pay them within a week or 15 days also. Like, so I did some research on this, and we found out that the average payout time for the farmers who were specifically the sugarcane farmers used to be months, and at times years also, before this ethanol progression started. Now they are in a very happy state where they are where they can get their money within 14-15 days. So, on one hand, that is a very good sign to have, but what it meant was that they are now growing more and more sugarcane, and sugarcane is a water guzzler with respect to its properties. So, sugarcane needs a lot of water for it to grow. So, again, along with energy security and food security debate, the other debate which starts coming into is water scarcity. So, whenever we are coming with the policy, what we need to keep in mind is that what are the long term impact of any of such policies, and is this policy actually sustainable from a long term perspective, is something which we need to always keep in mind. And so, at best, what I can see is that it's my personal view, is that ethanol should be viewed as a transactional migration strategy rather than the final strategy for India to make changes to its road transport story. So, this we need to be a bit careful about ethanol being the major source of our major part of our strategy going forward, because this may have long term implication with respect to food security versus energy security, water scarcity issue, also feedstock getting shifted from plates of people to petrol tanks of people. So, that's a very, very interesting situation we might kind of land of ourselves, which will not be a very fortunate interesting situation, but unfortunate interesting situation, and we need to be careful about that. Okay, so that was one aspect of it. Another thing which is happening in India is that electrification has started. To specifically with respect to EV buses, like the world is moving. So, one thing which India is doing differently, as I said, that I will be talking about how India is doing differently, how India is doing same. So, one thing that you can see that India is doing differently from most of the world is that India is worried about its energy security aspect also. So, for it is trying to have a source which can lead to a fuel generation within its own boundary walls, right. But on the other hand, India is kind of following one of the world trend is with respect to electrical vehicles. India growth of electrical vehicles has been very good, like it was kind of a slow started up to a point, but then government came up with FAME 1, FAME 2 and some kind of other incentives for the industry. Then industry was able to come up with a model that industry could come out with the very, very cost effective models, and specifically within the 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers kind of a category, we could see that a huge jump of about 23 million cumulative EV sales till financial 2023 was about more than 23 lakhs of units which kind of got sold, and then the growth in this sector was phenomenal. And I think I don't have the number of 2024 here, but that growth is kind of continuing right now, specifically for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. The industry is moving very quickly to electrical vehicles. Now, another debate which I would want you to consider here and I would want you to worry about, I think I have mentioned this in the past, But keep in mind is that India's EV is not as green as world electrical vehicle, because India grid emission is very high compared to the rest of the world. And since India's grid emission is very high compared to the rest of the world, so India's two-wheelers and three-wheelers, though they are transiting to electrical vehicles, but it is not having the same kind of an impact on the emissions as the world has right now. And this will get greener and greener as India moves to more greener generation of energy. So I'll come to the generation side later during my discourse, but you can understand that but India is making this transition, but is India having the same kind of impact on its emission because of this transition? Answer as of today is no. Another thing which India has started to do is that India has started to work out a policy with respect to bringing in hydrogen. So India has come up with this policy of hydrogen in vehicles as and specifically green hydrogen is what India is targeting. And what India is hoping is that India would ride upon the overall growth in this technology at a worldwide level, while India has come up with its own hydrogen policy and a very aggressive kind of a hydrogen policy, where India thinks that they can break this barrier of $1 per kg kind of a hydrogen cost, which some of the Indian companies have announced. But given the current situation of electrolyzer manufacturing primarily being done in China, and the way the industry is moving currently, I don't see that to be a very short-term possibility that India will be leading this market. But overall, what I can say is that India is kind of depending upon this hydrogen, specifically for heavy-duty freight and maritime transport. India would depend upon that, because that seems to be one of the best bets. Like for the rest of the world, India will depend upon this. Green hydrogen, however, is much more expensive compared to diesel, and that is something which is a cause of worry. Like though IEA kind of projects that we could have electrolyzers cost kind of going down substantially for 2022 to 2030, and a lot of technology development is happening on that end, but that is still to be seen. And so overall, in terms of long-term adoption of this, the cost reduction and the policy clarity on this would be the key. Because what I would like to show you from a policy perspective, it's a kind of a very loaded information slide. I would be sharing this with you in some time. But what I am seeing is that in India, many of these policies are rolled out with not a very clear long-term view in the mind. Either that is happening, or we are doing it under some pressure of showing to the world that we are reacting. Like for example, FAME 1 and FAME 2 came, and now we are done away with FAME. Either we are saying that FAME 1 and FAME 2 did its work and now they are not needed anymore. EV industry can run without any subsidy anymore. Are we saying that? Or we are saying that we are not sure how to support that industry. Why we did not support hybrid cars or hybrid bigger vehicles or hybrid buses even, for example. I don't know if any big hybrid buses in fact exist in India, right? Why we did not have a more comprehensive policy around it? And that is something which worries me as a policy researcher, is that sometimes we came up with these policies which are not end-to-end visibility around it. For example, even when we are talking so much about hydrogen, have we come across an integrated policy of how this hydrogen output or even the green hydrogen output is going to be part of the whole bigger ecosystem of the transport sector overall? So we have these multiple bodies like Central Institute of Road Transport, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Automotive Research part of India, Pollution Control Board. Are these bodies talking to each other and trying to come up with a comprehensive policy? At least I have still to come across kind of a very, very comprehensive document which talks about a seamless integration of a technology development to deployment for hydrogen, for electrical vehicle, also in terms of what is India's long-term vision on handling this from a long-term perspective, even with respect to battery pollution, with respect to handling the overall change in this grid infrastructure requirement, because grid will also be challenging. It will be a challenge on the grid also, because suddenly when you are starting to put this charging load onto the grid, it will have its own nuances. So overall, I think what is India missing in this framework, and I'll talk more about this when I come to the solar side of the story also. What worries me as a policy researcher right now on this, and this is what we need to also keep in mind, and you can do your own deeper research on this, is that what we need is more comprehensive end-to-end policy, and then specifically with respect, when I was mentioning with respect to hydrogen, I am still to see a very clear documentation of hydrogen coming through in this domain. But what we expect in terms of sector-wise thing is that we will continue to see that two-wheelers and three-wheelers will continue to lead electrification of vehicle market. Car sales are still not picking up with respect to this EV transition, as you can see from this data also, that car sales are very meager, and car sales have not really picked up. That sector needs to be much more aggressive if this electrical vehicle transition has to be made. But having said it, what we need to work first of all is to green our grid. So that work has to come through a lot. Trucks, which is the highest emitter as of now, there is not a very clear policy which has come for decarbonization of that industry as of now, and that needs to be a big focus area for India. Buses, however, since usually they are state department controlled, it is the state transport bodies which covers most of the buses side of the story. They are expected to be more electricity dependent as we kind of move along, as seen here also through some of the analysis of IEA, that IEA also expect that in two-wheelers and three-wheelers, the most of the story would start moving to electrical side. For passenger vehicles also, the start is expected to be slow, but eventually it will move to a status where more and more electrical vehicles will start coming into. For two-wheelers, three-wheelers, starts has been aggressive, and it is going to be the major source of charging of these source of energy for these vehicles as we kind of move along. For freight trucks, not a very clear-cut picture. Still, what we can see is that diesel is not going anywhere as far as the India is current policy announcements seems to be the that is what is the case. It seems to be with respect to current policy announcement. So very clear policy needs to come up with this. As some of you would remember that this is the highest emitter for India as of now. So if this is the highest emitter for India as of now, we need to have more comprehensive policy around this side. On buses, however, we do expect some movement which has already started. That movement will kind of continue, and since it is more state owned, these things might come through. In terms of the fuel side, diesel will remain as a major fuel primarily because of truck even after 2050. Even when 2050, we don't think that we will be like specifically for freight trucks, the diesel will continue to be one of the major sources of energy, and we are not going away with that. For other vehicles, for passenger cars and for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, we do however see that we will reduce our dependence on petrol. So petrol will continue to have its role, but our dependence on petrol will go down, and more dependence on electricity might come through. So having said it, there is one interesting thing I like to leave you with this specific sector. I saw this beautiful analysis by one of the kind of think tanks, one of the organizations, where they came up with two scenarios of making India's road transport or making transport sector net zero. What they said is that there could be two scenarios. One could be railway focused scenario, one could be road based scenario. So what we were saying was that in one scenario, what can be done is that we can have a very, so what are the concern areas? So we are saying two-wheelers and three-wheelers will move to electrical, four-wheelers will move to electrical, buses will move to electrical, and with electrical becoming more and more renewable energy dependent and more dependent upon greener sources of energy, this sector should start becoming greener as we kind of move along. So what is the problem area? Problem area for us in that remains as a freight thing, which is the concern area for us. So one of the thought process which was put by this specific research group was that we can have a pathway to net zero emissions. What was there said that we could have more innovative urban planning through which we will number of vehicles which will ply on the road, the amount of fuel that these specific vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, buses, whatever they will consume, or trucks will have intercity kind of movement, that can be reduced per amount of commodity which they are carrying or people which travel in them. That can be reduced by innovative urban planning. Improved efficiency will have its own role, but an alternative fuel will have its own role with respect to biofuel coming into picture, hydrogen coming into picture, and those kind of fuels coming into picture. But major shift that they were putting in was that there has to be a modal shift of moving all the freight primarily from road transport to railway transport. And if you can do that and you can electrify everything at the same time, what you can potentially do is that you can then generate this electricity using renewable energy sources, and by doing that you can basically have a major impact on its emission of India. And this concern of freight sector not getting decarbonized can be taken by through a modal shift from a road truck based strategy to a railway based strategy. Second strategy that they kind of debated on was that, hang on, there could be a problem with this strategy. The problem in this strategy is the last mile connectivity, because railway, as I mentioned earlier also in my lecture, will have its own concern with respect to going to the every nook and corner of the city. The last mile within the city, last mile within the urban setup or any rural setup also has to be connected through road network only. So if that is the case, then this strategy will have its own limitations, and the last mile connectivity will be a very challenging strategy. So the second strategy which they kind of came up with was that while innovative urban planning was one thing, partially it can move to railways also. Alternative fuel will have its own role, improved efficiency will have its own role. But what they were saying was that, can we then come up with the strategy where we work very diligently on somehow we electrify this whole freight trucks also, which is not an easy things to do given the current state of technology. But what they were saying that these are two major paths through which the whole carbon neutral journey for India can potentially be traveled, and they came up with these two scenarios. So it's open for debate that which strategy will work out better. But what you can see as a researcher in this area or as a student in this area is that Indian transport sector will have its own nuances which will be different from the world nuances, specifically with respect to energy security, very fast growing demand, because demand in India is expected to grow as India moves from lower middle class to middle class, and middle class will move to upper middle class. Thus, the buying potential of India's population itself will put a lot of stress on the whole consumption story. So, that is going to be the major key thing. A lack of policy integration across ministries, across verticals is a challenge for India currently, and that India needs to work upon. But is everything lost? Answer is no. There could be some pathways to it, but very elaborative planning has to be done from India to move from current status of its road transport emission to a net zero road transport emission if India really has to achieve its target of achieving this net zero in 2070. I think I have covered the major emission sectors with respect to direct consumption based sector where the energy kind of goes. So, I have covered steel and aluminum, I've covered cement sector, and now the road transport sector. There's two more things that we will move into. The next biggest energy consumption for Indian or for global thing also is buildings. So, next we will start touching upon building, and then that would kind of cover our vertical for the whole energy related emissions, and then we will move into a non-energy based emission which will be from the agriculture side. So, that is how we will kind of move in next few lectures. Thank you and see you in the next lecture.